It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast, presented, of course, by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman. Most of you know that. 5 teams, 7 years, awesome temp gig in my 20s. So pumped up for this weekend. I'll be on the call Thursday night with Ian Eagle for Westwood One National Radio. Eagles, Commanders, gigantic game. First flight Friday morning down to Miami for the Raiders with their new OC, Scott Turner, against the Dolphins, who look really good on Monday night. I'll be in the booth for CBS with Tom McCarthy and Jay Feely on Sunday. So should be awesome, almost as awesome as listening to my guy John just dispense knowledge and information like it's his job, because it is, every single Wednesday and Thursday, because it's the show that's so nice we do it twice. You guys know the drill by now, right? We'll do the Thursday night game, the 1 o'clock game, as many as we can. Kind of split it in half. 2 digestible, bite-sized podcasts for you guys here on the Ross Tucker Podcast Network. Let's start with the game I'm calling on the radio, John. By the way, if you're not following John on Twitter, but you like fantasy football, you're probably doing it wrong. At not J Daigle. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. You can also get a veritable smorgasbord of information at establishtherun.com. Just use the code FEAST when you do, so you get the discount. It's not too late. You can either make sure you're pushing the pedal to the metal so you win your league, or you can be like our producer Jack, who's just desperately trying to avoid the chocolate milk mile for last place. So whatever your reasoning, I don't care. Go to establishtherun.com. Use the code FEAST. Commanders, Eagles, John, talk to me.
We're about to start playoff content there, too, since the trade deadline for fantasy is right around the corner. But as it pertains to this game on Thursday night between the Commanders and Eagles, I will admit to you I'm a little bit scared about Washington's offense. They have still been efficient the past 2 games, but what has happened is that since Jaden Daniels initially suffered that rib injury, we've seen the explosiveness come back down to earth. Just a 56% completion rate and 6 carries per game for Daniels in that stint, compared to prior to that, 75% completion rate and 8.5 yards per attempt. Not only that, but I know you can also attest to this, Ross. This Eagles defense is different in 5 games since returning from their bye. They haven't played the greatest of opponents or schedule of quarterbacks, I know, but still has only allowed 4.9 yards per attempt, 1 total passing touchdown across 5 games with 4 interceptions, even holding Joe Burrow just a couple weeks ago to 234 passing yards and 1 score. So overall, again, I am worried a hair about the explosiveness of what the Commanders can accomplish in this matchup. Not the same, though, can be said for the Eagles, because out of the bye for Jalen Hurts, he's been truly amazing. 72% completion rate, 10.1 yards per attempt with 16 touchdowns from scrimmage, including 8 rushing scores. It is funny how it works, that it seems like every Eagles running back that's ever played with Jalen Hurts is just very good at getting tackled inside the 2-yard line. And then that allows Hurts to obviously then run the most efficient play in all of football on the tush push. But still, they have a way to get it done, and the Commanders still leak production on the ground. Just in the last month, DeAndre Swift had 129 yards and a touchdown, and Derrick Henry 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. So still have confidence in Barkley's very high floor. For the Commanders' passing game, we'll see if we get Brian Robinson in this one. It sounds like he's confident he's going to play. And although Eckler has handled 11, 13 carries the past 2 weeks, we did see that behind Robinson this year, he hasn't reached 10 carries. So he becomes more of a flex option. And Terry McLaurin for the Commanders has quietly been out-targeted 13-9 from veteran Noah Brown the past 2 games, who, if you're looking for a sneaky flex option in deeper 12, 14-team leagues, just because you have injuries and bye weeks, then I think you can squeeze Noah Brown in here.
Love it. I'm fired up for that one. Kind of mirrors some of my thoughts going into the game. What about another big game? Packers-Bears. Bears made the OC change, John.
They make the OC change to Thomas Brown, but I'm still worried overall. Sacks are a quarterback stat. And yes, Caleb Williams has dealt with many offensive line injuries. He went into last week against the Patriots already without 4 starting offensive linemen, and then the Bears lost left guard Tevin Jenkins in the second quarter to an ankle injury. But still, that's 6 sacks in back-to-back games, and it wasn't against teams that we know for their pressure rate. It was the Cardinals and Patriots that had no issues reaching Caleb Williams. And even then, last week against New England, 140 yards of offense, 2.4 yards per play. The Bears went 1 of 14 on third down. So, do we have a little bit more hope? Yes, but I'm still skeptical that from the top down, this offense may just be broken, especially in their first game, trying to change the playbook. The last time we saw the Panthers in the last month of 2023 under Thomas Brown, we do know that he did slow the game down, and he had Bryce Young and a surrounding cast that basically Carolina got rid of prior to this season under Dave Canales, that he had that to work with. So we just don't know what this offense is going to look like. You can start DJ Moore, who continues to be hammered as one of the league leaders in screen receptions. We think his routes are going to change now. Rome Odunze may get integrated into 2 wide receiver sets, but overall, I'm still pretty worried about this Bears offense and this spot against the Packers defense that can get pressure on you. They showed us that before their bye. And remember that the Bears now, 6 of their next 8 games are against division opponents. So it's time to get it together in a hurry. For the Packers, I think we will be getting everyone back at full strength. Jordan Love, we'll see, because the last time we saw him, and the 2 weeks before the bye against the Jaguars and Lions, he was struggling through that groin or calf injury, and he very clearly wasn't the same player at all. Even against the Lions, he was hampering around, and it was raining really hard. There were some drop touchdown passes that weren't his fault, but I would think that 14 days to rest does get him back into our life as a low-end QB1. So between Love, Jaden Reed, and Romeo Doubs and Josh Jacobs, those are the players I think we can have confidence in this game from the Packers after their bye.
Love it. What about the Jaguars and the Lions? Another Sunday 1 o'clock game. I guess we haven't heard anything official about Trevor Lawrence yet this week. At least I haven't seen it.
Nothing official just yet, although all reports sound ominous. Closer to a quarterback that sounds like he's going to miss the rest of the year than play this week, especially as the Jaguars are locked in and currently competing for that number 1 overall pick next year. They wouldn't take a quarterback, but it's always good to have the number 1 overall pick in your back pocket. So we'll see what they decide to do, especially since they have so many other issues to worry about, especially on defense around Trevor Lawrence. Mac Jones stepped in, and it was against a ferocious Vikings defense that we know quarterbacks have struggled against all year. But the results were not great. 1 fumble, 2 interceptions, 3 sacks, and just 5 yards per attempt. No quarterback has thrown multiple touchdown passes against the Lions all season, and that includes a slate against Dak Prescott, Sam Darnold, Jordan Love, and CJ Stroud over the last month. So, unsurprisingly, yes, I am very worried about Brian Thomas, Mac Jones, and the Jaguars' offense as a whole. But I won't say that about the Lions, because although we saw Jared Goff be resilient, multiple interceptions, came back on Sunday Night Football in the second half, and that's what good teams do. Good teams, even in the face of adversity, figure it out, find a way to win. This is not that game. We talk about every week what the Jaguars defense loves to do and continuing to be top 5 in man coverage, and it will not surprise you to know that Jared Goff, under offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, who will find a way to exploit you if you're only leaving one guy on his receivers. Goff has averaged a league-high 10.9 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, no picks against man coverage. I am not worried about the Lions' passing game in the slightest. Ignore that matchup against the Texans last week, whereas the Jaguars, we know, continue squeezing QB1s against us, which is why Sam Darnold was my value pick last week, and that's another story. We'll get there soon. But Jared Goff, all the confidence in the world for him, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, regardless of Sam Laporta's status here.
Sound like it'll be a good game for Lions fans to drink some Labatt Blue Lights with your fellow fans and live life to the power of we. Always enjoy it responsibly. Delicious beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York, not that far from Detroit. What about the Raiders and the Dolphins? This is my other game. This is my Sunday 1 o'clock CBS booth game. I already have a bunch of stats and notes from you for Thursday night. I love it, John. You're helping me do my prep. What do you got for Raiders, Dolphins?
I wish I had more confidence in what the Raiders were going to do coming out of their bye. But remember, they fired offensive coordinator Luke Getsy before they went away, and they're coming back with Scott Turner. Most of the time when we see coordinator changes, what happens is those teams then love to establish the run. Alexander Mattison was the Raiders starting running back prior to the bye, but for a full month there, Zamir White was banged up. Even when he was in there, he was still a limited player. I do wonder, I suggested this in the Establish the Run waiver wire column, I do wonder if we come back out from the bye and see Zamir White used as more of a featured back just to try to get the running game going. The player, regardless of what happens with running backs, that I still think is going to be successful here is Jacoby Myers. Because now in the 4 games that Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers have overlapped without Devontae Adams. Because remember, Jacoby was absent there for a handful of games. It's actually been Myers who's been more successful than Bowers. A 30% target share to Bowers' 21% in those contests. Both players are great. Both players can get there for fantasy. But I think Myers is the one we should be buying low in fantasy ahead of the trade deadline right now because he continues earning more targets regardless of who is under center. For the Dolphins, it's just a lot more complicated than it was last year. This is an offense now that's using its tight ends and running backs significantly more than last season. So much so that Tyreek Hill, remember, over a 30% target share last year, leading the team this season with only a 20% share. And that's because even Jonnu Smith has more targets than Jalen Waddle this season. They're just featuring everyone, including Devon Achane, underneath from Tua, and that's also why Tua's depth of target this year is so much closer to the line of scrimmage. This offense has become more about getting the ball out as quickly as possible within 5 yards of that line of scrimmage. So it's been peppered around, and Tyreek Hill's also dealing with this wrist injury, which we can attribute to why he struggled so much compared to his past years as being just a league-winning option in fantasy. And that's my concern here, is that everyone is so involved that really no one stands out other than Devon Achane, who we have seen stay afloat the team's backfield. Over the last 2 weeks, what has happened, Ross, is that Week 9, remember, Raheem Mostert recorded his 6th fumble in the last calendar year, and then he was benched in the second half. And now over the last 6 quarters, it's been rookie Jalen Wright who's out-touched Mostert 10-3, including on Monday Night Football where he out-carried Mostert 5-0. But around that, Achane is still, 1, looked great, but 2, 17 touches on Monday Night Football. So Achane is the one running back we can still trust here. Mostert, wherever it's available in fantasy, I'm just dropping him outright for Jalen Wright on waiver wires.
Wow, yeah, he kind of got benched there after last season, which was just incredible. Okay, what about the Rams, who got a lot of yards on Monday night, but not a lot of touchdowns, exactly 0. Now they're playing against the Patriots, whose defense looked really good, at least against the Bears and the Titans, actually, back-to-back weeks.
It was back-to-back weeks against Mason Rudolph and Caleb Williams. So I do want to step back and say, okay, maybe it's still like not the Patriots defense actually clicking. Maybe it was just the matchups, fortuitous ones that they had. But yes, Matthew Stafford still struggled because we know, a lot like Joe Flacco, Geno Smith, Matthew Stafford is one of those guys that if you can just get pressure on him, you can change that Rams offense entirely. But it is going to be another week where they have Steve Avila and Jonah Jackson back on the offensive line. It is a short week, yes, but another week where they're getting healthier. So I do have a little more faith here, and I continue leaning towards Puka Nacua over Cooper Kupp. I understand that it's splitting hairs with those two, who are wide receiver ones. And in the 10 quarters they've played together, because remember, Puka was ejected for the second half of Week 9, and the 10 quarters they've played together, Puka has merely out-targeted Cooper Kupp 27-24. But in this game in particular, Gerard Mayo and the Patriots defense love their man coverage, second most in the league that they play. And Puka this year, 32% of his targets have come against man coverage. Last season, 19.5 yards per catch against man. He's too big-bodied. He has too great of body control. He runs a lot of slants and sideline routes that he can get himself open against that style of coverage. So if you have to pick one, I do love Puka in this game. And for the Patriots, although the Rams defense, we saw this against Tua and the Dolphins. The Rams defense really has turned a corner. They have leaked some big plays in that time after their bye, but between Jared Verse, Kobe Durant, everyone getting back healthy, Darius Williams, they've been a different unit. The good thing is that we've seen Drake May, make 4 complete starts for fantasy. And because he's averaging 44 rushing yards per game, he's also providing 16.9 fantasy points, which would qualify as the QB12, a QB1 for fantasy in that time. So despite the Rams clicking on defense, I do think Drake May's rushing floor can get him by here as a strong superflex option. The only rushing quarterback the Patriots have played this year, Kyler Murray, ran for 59 yards in that game. So a lot of faith here for May. We also saw Mayo, before the game, suggest that he was going to go with a youth movement. And that led to him healthy scratching Kendrick Bourne, and instead 22-year-old Kayshon Boutte leading the Patriots wide receivers in routes run and targets. It is still Demario Douglas who May is preferring from the slot. Douglas has not dropped below a 21% target share in the 3 games he's finished with May this year. But I think there are 2 wide receivers they are going to lean on for the rest of the year are Boutte and Douglas now.
That is really interesting. I mean, youth movement makes sense, but didn't they just pay Bourne in the offseason? Like, the Patriots have so many guys that they've paid. Uche, Jabril Peppers. I mean, Uche's already gone. You know, Jabril Peppers has had issues. Just a interesting situation there.
And they drafted Jalen Polk and Javon Baker and can't get those guys on the field, which may not even be the coaching staff's fault. Those guys have been struggling, but they drafted them too.
Right. All right. I think it makes, honestly, Drake May looking competent seem even more impressive when you think about it. I mean, they got guys starting on the offensive line, John, I never heard of. That never happens. That never happens.
This is my argument in starting Drake May too, is that everyone blamed Jacoby Brissett for the offensive line's woes, and that is a little bit true. He did hold on to the ball. He did cause his own sacks, but you still have to get guys like that in there, like Drake May, to figure out what you have. Like, we wouldn't know that Drake May is this good, especially this elusive, if we had not just seen him make a handful of starts. He's been awesome. Last week against the Bears, like, you could attest to this, one of those guys looked like the number 1 overall pick. The other one looked like Caleb Williams.
It's a terrific point. Honestly, John, I think Bo Nix looks better than Caleb Williams.
Bo Nix does look good.
Anyway, we'll get to that. I don't want to go too far. Let's get to speaking of getting to that. The Browns are coming off their bye. The Saints. I know you had MVS in all your lineups, John. I know you did.
To be fair, I did have him as a streaming option, and that was only because the Saints had nowhere else to go.
He's like the best ball guy ever.
Yes.
Because he's gonna score for a couple weeks. He's gonna really help you in best ball.
All right, and now let's come back to earth and realize that was a career-high 25.9 fantasy points for Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and the first time he's reached 20 points since 2019. And he did all of it. And he did all of it on 3 targets. So are we trusting that? Absolutely not. But if you're really desperate for bye weeks, it is the same situation where not expecting Chris Olave to play. Honestly, I personally don't think he will return for the Saints this year, given that extreme concussion he suffered. But also, Bub Means and Cedric Wilson missing for this team's wide receivers room as well. Like, they only have Marquez Valdes-Scantling out there. So 14-team leagues, fire him up. Why the hell not? But again, I am pretty skeptical about him sustaining that production. What I'm not skeptical about is, 1, Alvin Kamara, who they, remember, last month gave an extension to, which then heightened his floor for fantasy because that means they are not taking him off the field at any point, especially as Darren Rizzi competes to, like Antonio Pierce, hold on to this interim head coaching job over the offseason. And in the last 3 games, Kamara hasn't scored a touchdown. But look at his fantasy points without scoring a touchdown. 18.2, 27.5, and 15.9. There are only 1, two other guys that can do that without scoring a touchdown. His floor is just so incredibly high as a matchup-proof starter weekly. Where my concern comes in for the Saints is that, one, Derek Carr under pressure this year has still struggled, 4 interceptions, and the Browns, despite their defensive woes in their secondary, are creating the league's highest pressure rate. 45% of dropbacks against them reach the opposing quarterback. So I'm a little bit worried about the Saints offense in that terms. On the other side of the ball, the last time we saw the Browns, we talked about how nightmarish of a matchup it was against the Chargers. This is not the same one, because although the Saints impressed under Rizzi, which, by the way, is just the blueprint of sports betting, it is a head coaching change, heading back home against a divisional opponent. It was so obvious the Saints were going to pull that one off. But they didn't do so because their defense. 16 of Kirk Cousins' 21 completions went for 10-plus yards. The Saints' passing defense still struggled mightily. And now they get Jameis Winston in this game, who we at least saw prior against the Ravens, prior to the Chargers matchup, can light you up deep. So I think Jameis Winston should be back in our good graces as a fringe QB1 in this one, and we know where he's going to go. Cedric Tillman in 3 games without Amari Cooper, 12, 9, and 11 targets. So love the Jameis to Tillman connection this week.
All right, it is your last chance to take advantage of this awesome contest via my friends over at Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka and an official vodka partner of the NFL. They are giving fans in select areas of the country a chance to win the ultimate game day experience, from tickets to sideline passes and so much more. Just head to WeDoGameDays.com until November 15th, that's this week, to enter your chance to win. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. No purchase necessary. 21 plus. Ends 11/15/24. See rules at website for participating area and other important details. Sponsored by Diageo Americas Incorporated, New York, New York. Again, go to WeDoGameDays.com. Smirnoff, We Do Game Days. Ooh, all right. Well, then so do I. What about, let's get to one more good one here in episode #1. We're diving into the ball pit. It's Ravens, Steelers. A lot to get to here, John.
For as much fun as the Ravens offense has been, I'll talk about that in a second, I'm still worried come the playoffs about their defense because the secondary has been an atrocious mess. Let's talk about it in terms of fantasy, not just football, because now it's a Baltimore secondary that's allowed 21 fantasy points and multiple passing touchdowns to 5 of the last 6 quarterbacks they've faced. They've also allowed a league-high 22 completions on throws 20 yards downfield, and we know that's where Russ wants to go. The second most pass attempts, 17.5% of his attempts have gone 20 yards downfield, and he's completed a league best 53% of them. So I think the Steelers' passing offense with George Pickens and Mike Williams and Russ can have an amazing day here. Even Mike Williams, just 7 routes last week. You wouldn't know it because he spiked that 32-yard game-winning touchdown, but we expect him to be closer to a mid to full-time player in this game. So love streaming him this week. And how do the Ravens respond? Because the Steelers' defense is what has also helped them, while Russell Wilson has given their offense a ceiling that can now score enough points to win games. The thing is, we need to keep an eye on the injury report because it seemed like Alex Highsmith suffered what could be a multi-week injury last week, and we saw a handful of games without Highsmith earlier this year, and the Steelers' defense literally went from top 5 in pressure rate to bottom 5 in the league. And
I think Tomlin already said he's out for this week.
Okay.
He called him week to week, and I'm pretty confident he said he's out for this week.
Okay, and if that's the case, the Steelers, again, without him, bottom 5 pressure rate in the league earlier this year. And Lamar Jackson from a clean pocket, a league best 10.5 yards per attempt for 16 touchdowns and only 2 picks. So we think the Ravens defense and Ravens offense and Steelers offenses can just go nuclear in this game. The only thing that holds me back is because we're talking about the Ravens and the Steelers being potent offenses, whereas like previously these two teams played each other, the 13-10 brutal contest, like just solved in the trenches. But I do think these are two passing offenses now. We'll also see on Isaiah Likely. Last week, without Likely, Mark Andrews, season highs in both routes run and 7 targets. So regardless of whether Deontay Johnson is more involved, we haven't seen him run double-digit routes in either of his 2 games he's played with the Ravens thus far, as they continue to integrate him slowly behind Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. Regardless of that, if Likely is out, we can start Andrews with confidence, and we still think the Ravens' passing offense is going to be elite in this.
You know, the one point I will mention about the Highsmith stat, they do have Preston Smith now, so that helps a little bit with the edge rush since they traded for him. Obviously didn't have him earlier in the season. So fired up for episode number 2. Loving my boy John Daigle every week. Check him out on social, at NotJDaigle. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod, and you can watch us on YouTube, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Episode 2 is coming up now.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.